Yes, please. Thank you.
Listening to you, I went on a memory lane, remembering the 10th anniversary, so to speak, of the pogrom of Gujarat, when we met at Goodbrook Society. Testa was there, Ashmander, Cedric Prakash, Shivish Vanathan, and it was such an important moment to stand and say, it happened. It happened. In spite of all the erosion, all the attempt at denying, diluting, forgetting, to commemorate is important, to have it registered, to have it in the collective memory. So this is the 25th anniversary, there will be a 30th anniversary, there have to be a 35th. It has to be constantly reminded, especially because, as you said, those who were born after that would not know. And, well, if I can just make a comparison with France, we have just commemorated the 100 years of the First World War. And I came to learn that after we recuperated the eastern part of France that had been taken by the Germans in 1870, the French had expelled hundreds of thousands of people who were considered as German in that part. It was not in any of our textbooks. So you realize that you can erase facts, massive facts, if the state is not registering them in history. So if the state doesn't do it, citizens have to do it, and they have need to commemorate. And the second point I wanted to make has to do with the civil society kind of resistance that can be opposed to criminal forces at a time when not only you have vigilantes, but you have also policemen supporting the vigilantes, or being complacent with the vigilantes, or being killed by the vigilantes. Whatever the result, you can't rely on the police. So in these circumstances, you need civil society to get organized even more. Because who else can take care of minorities? But of course it cannot be a resistance that uses force, because this is self-defeating. It has to be, of course, non-violent, as you said, but it has to be massive, because a non-violent minority within the minority cannot make much of a difference. And in fact, this is the kind of preparation, networking, that Mahatma Gandhi did, if you remember that. Sorry, I will really be particular with that. So yes, these are the 2 points I'm going to make, but the second one, of course, with one deadline in view, we may well see events happening again in the coming month, and in a different circumstances, requesting society to get prepared for this kind of confrontation even more than before. Well, there is a kind of continuity between what you've said and the book you've made and what I'm going to tell you. Simply because the same way you try to get memories right, I try to get facts right. Yeah, the NSS survey is postponed. The Labor Bureau is not working properly. Statistics are changed every year. You have a different growth rate. You know, where are the statistics? Where are the data? They are vanishing. And you can't have a public debate. You can't really engage in a democratic manner if you don't know what the facts are, what is really happening. Because if you don't know what is happening, of course, demagogy, populism, and any kind of deformation is bound to happen. So, this is why, with colleagues, students, including Mita, by the way, we are compiling data, and it has become a kind of industry. I'm not at all a data person. I don't like so much compiling figures and so on, but I've forced myself, and with Ashoka University, Trivedi Center for Political Data, we have compiled massive databases. So what I'm going to share with you is a series of graphs, tables that I will comment, of course, but I think it's very important to know where we stand. And what I'm going to show is first that Muslims have been traditionally very much underrepresented in almost each sphere of the state apparatus. And really it came as a surprise to me. I did not anticipate such a low representation of Muslims in so many spheres of the public apparatus. That will be the first part of my presentation. We'll speak about the police, we'll speak about the IPS, IAS. We'll speak about the judiciary if we have the time. That's the first section. Muslims have never been there, in fact. And I repeat, it was really a surprise for me. I thought it was better before. It was not. Where it was better before was in the elected assemblies. You used to have Muslim MLAs, you used to have Muslim MPs, you used to have Muslim ministers. And what we see now is a decline of this as well. And I keep the rest for the conclusion. So if we turn to the first table, and again I repeat, I will try to be quick, but and I hope you will see it properly from the back. What you have here is the proportion of Muslims among the IPS officers between 1951 and 2016. That took us a long time to come by. And by the way, to find the list of IPS officers is really something difficult. Yes. Muslims have never, or have only twice, represented more than 4% of the IPS officers of this country. And even less than that if you remove Jammu and Kashmir, because in Jammu and Kashmir you need to have IPS officers who are Muslim. If you remove Jammu and Kashmir, then you have to fall back on the red bars. And the red bars tell you that Muslims have almost never represented more than 3% of the IPS officers. 3% of the IPS officers, when of course the proportion of Muslims, this is the green line, has increased from 10% to 14.5% if you go by the 2011 census. So the gap between the percentage of Muslims in society and the percentage of Muslims among IPS officers is now something like 11 percentage points. It has never been so huge. There are hardly any IPS officers taking care of law and order in states like Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and so on. Among the IAS officers, Muslims have always been very much underrepresented. Some years you have 0 Muslims included in the IAS batches. This is only between 78 and 2016 because it's very difficult to get all lists, civil lists. Maximum in the 95 batch, you have 8% of the IAS officers who are Muslims. And as I said, in many cases, there is a decline of taking them to 0. What does it mean? It means that there are very few Muslim DMs, district magistrates, of course, very few secretaries and adjunct secretaries, and so on. I'll skip the judiciary story, but the judiciary story is very similar. Very few judges, very few justices. And the gap again is increasing because you have only 10% of Muslims in 51, you have 14.5% of Muslims in 2011. Okay, so the gap is increasing. So, yeah, I was mentioning the judiciary just by passing, the situation is the same, very few Muslims, and less in that. What I want to focus upon now is the presence of Muslims in the elected assemblies, Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha. Lok Sabha is a very interesting and disturbing trend, shows a very disturbing trend. In 1980, with 49 MPs, Muslims represent 9% of the Lok Sabha. 9% at a time when Muslims are 11%. The gap is very small. Now this is a very interesting election. Indira Gandhi is back. Indira Gandhi is back with some Muslim support. And she gives tickets to many Muslim candidates. And if you look at the trend, from 9%, it declines to 8.4%, to 6%, to 5.1%. There is a slight increase afterwards when, especially when UPA 1 takes over in 2004, 6.4%, and then it declines again, 2009, 5.5%, and the last Lok Sabha election has sent a record number of Muslims in terms of diminution, because we are below 4%. Of course, the by-election recently gave one MP in UP to the Muslims, but UP is a tragic story because there was absolutely no other Muslim before. And for the first time in 2014, the ruling party can win the election without even one Muslim MP. Never in the history of India you had the winning party without any Muslim MP. And that forced the BJP government to go to the Rajya Sabha for fighting Muslim ministers or Minister of State. But again, very few of them. But I will turn to that later on. Because you had only two Muslim ministers, and never before you had so few representatives of the minorities in the government of India. Incidentally, one of them is a Shia, and unsurprisingly, you have this, we can return to that in the discussion if you want, you have a very disturbing alignment of some Shia leaders on the BJP, especially in Lucknow, which is a new development. Well, not so new in a way, but to that extent, yes, it's a new development. And that's something we can return to in the discussion if you want, because this kind of sectarian divide is, of course, undermining the capacity of resistance of the minority. What is interesting, sorry, let's now turn to this table. What is interesting, and you can't really follow all this data from such a long distance, but what is interesting is to see who gives tickets to Muslim candidates. Well, some parties are, of course, ignoring the Muslims, and BJP is the first one to do that. Only 1.6% of their candidates were Muslim. So, of course, to have zero MP is not so surprising. So, who gives tickets to Muslims? Congress doesn't. Congress is not giving tickets to Muslims in large numbers. Only 5.7% of the Congress candidates were Muslim. 5.7%. I will return to that. Congress is following, well, we'll return to that. It's a very, very, very important point, and I want to elaborate on that by looking at other data, reconfirming this trend. So who gives tickets? Of course, RJD, I will not give all the list, but just keep 3 or 4 names in mind. RJD. RJD in VR, 20.7% of Muslims, of Muslim candidates. Samajwadi Party, 18.4% of Muslim candidates. 18% is exactly the percentage of Muslims in UP. 18 plus. So, they gave the same percentage to Muslims among the candidates as Muslims are representing in society. BSP, not that great, 9.6% only in 2014. Trinamool Congress, I'll return to that. Trinamool is indeed with 16%, giving many tickets to the here you have Muslims. A very interesting evolution, because at the state level, the first scenario you see is the drastic diminution of Muslim MLAs when BJP takes over from a state party. First type. Like 2017, BJP wins a landslide victory in UP. Look at the graph. The percentage of Muslim MLAs dropped from 18% or 17% to 6%. So today you have 6% of Muslim MLAs in Lucknow, 0 on the Congress, 2 on the BJP side. And again, in Adityanath, in Yogi Adityanath's government, you have 2 Muslim ministers, including 1 Shia. So that's the first type. Drastic diminution of Muslim representation when power shifts from a state party to a BJP government. The second type is represented by Maharashtra in the first place, but you will see it will be represented by many others. It makes hardly any difference when power shifts from Congress to BJP. The percentage of Muslims among MLAs is already very low when the ruling party is Congress. You look at Maharashtra, it makes hardly any difference. You know, in Maharashtra, the Muslims represent somewhat, 10% of society, and they have never represented more than 5% of the MLAs in the 90s and 2000s. Be the Shiv Sena or the Congress or the BJP in office, makes hardly. This is also true of Gujarat. You know, in Gujarat, in 1990, the winner is Congress. The percentage of Muslim MLAs drops like anything. And BJP retains power since 1995. It makes hardly any difference. So, same story. Huge underrepresentation. In Gujarat, Muslims are slightly less numerous, 9%. And they have never represented in the 90s and 2000s more than 2.5% of the MLAs. You have a couple of Muslim MLAs in places where you can only have a Muslim MLA. Ahmedabad, Baroda have seats which are Muslim dominated. So what else can you have? Beyond that, nothing. This is also true of Karnataka. I need to update that, but really the next election made no difference. Same story. 10% of Muslims, whoever is in office since the 90s, never more than 5% of the MLAs are Muslim. Whoever is in office, GDS, Congress, BJP, makes no difference. And last but not least, Madhya Pradesh, where in fact we've seen a decline, but a decline from 2% to 0.5%. So it was already remarkably low. You know, 2% under DJC, 0.5% against under Shivraj Chauhan. By the way, I have just updated this data. This is something we've done with the Ashoka University people last night. You see the Muslims at the bottom. The new government, the new assembly, elected the day before yesterday, makes hardly any difference. Very, very few Muslims have been elected, in spite of the coming back of the Congress. The state where it makes some difference when Congress is in office is Rajasthan, and that's the last case. You see, the second type so far has suggested that it makes no difference when the Congress is in office or when the BJP is in office. Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh represent this type. Rajasthan is interesting because every 5 years they change. And it makes some difference for them. When Congress is in office, when Ashok Gehlot is chief minister, you see they peak above 6%. When BJP is in office, they drop to 1% only. And this is true also of what happened yesterday, or day before yesterday. Slight recovery, you see on this graph. Here are the Muslims. You see what we saw is true again. When BJP is there, it's very low. When Congress is there, it's somewhat higher. But it's not such a big difference. So the conclusion you have to draw from this second type is Congress still representing Muslims in the assemblies? And we need to talk more about that. It's not because they don't give tickets to Muslims that they don't defend Muslims, but they can do more. And the third and last type is represented by only one state, that is West Bengal. The only state in India where the percentage of Muslims is increasing in the assembly is West Bengal. Because of Trinamool Congress. But of course it's not proportional to the percentage of Muslims, because Muslims are more than 30% and MLAs are roughly at 20%. What I want to quickly add is that it's not because Muslims don't want to be elected, don't want to be represented, that there are so few in assemblies. In fact, we will go through this series showing that the percentage of Muslim candidates, the number of Muslim candidates has continuously increased till the late 90s, when it became very expensive. When you lost your deposit, well, you lost a lot. So, less Muslim candidates offered themselves for election, but they started to increase again. Look at this graph, all these hundreds of people in Gujarat are Muslim people who fought elections as independent, because nobody gave them tickets. And it's not only in Gujarat. If you go through the list, Karnataka, same story, Maharashtra, many people. Can you see these figures? It's amazing. You have in Maharashtra, you have 400 Muslim candidates in 2014. 400 Muslim people tried to be elected in the Vidhan Sabha election of 2014 as independent, because nobody gave them tickets. Same in Madhya Pradesh. Yeah, next. Orissa also. Orissa, of course, few Muslims are there, but it works the same way. Rajasthan, same trend. UP, almost similar. And West Bengal, of course. So it's not that they don't want to be elected, it is just that they are not given tickets, and therefore as independent, they fail. How can you be elected as an independent? No way. Why does it matter? And I'll end there. Why does it matter to have MPs and MLAs? Because you can say, well, you don't need to be there, really. Some other people can take care of us. In fact, it doesn't work like that. If you were in a political science class, I would elaborate on theories of representation. You know, there are two theories of representation. One theory says you just let anybody represent your interest because the MP will take care of his constituency, not of its community. That's one theory. And the other theory says it's much better to have your people in the corridors of power because nobody else will take care of you. There are two theories of representation. And the second one, I think, is much more relevant. In fact, we have just completed a very interesting research at Ashoka University again about who speaks for the Muslims in the Lok Sabha. It's a very complicated issue. You have to look at all the aspects, riots, reservations, triple talaq or whatever related to personal law. You know, we have a list of what does it mean to speak for the Muslim. And we came with this conclusion, that in fact, more than 23% of all the questions asked to the government about Muslims came from Muslim MPs, who represent only 3.7% of the MPs. So 3.7% of the MPs are responsible for more than 1/5 of the questions, showing that, yes, they speak more for their people, and it makes sense. So that's my conclusion. It matters a lot to have some people representing your interest in these assemblies, because if this group, if the treaty is not there, there will be less people to speak in defense of the minorities. And that's the view.
Defined offense under Indian Penal Code to say any class of citizens should be disenfranchised. They are committing this crime openly, blatantly, and nobody is taking any action against them. Not even a case is registered against them. So this continuous demonization and stigmatization of Muslims is leading to this kind of situation. With this, I think we will open up the floor for everybody to ask questions, comments, both to anyone, any of the author, as well as to.
I am an executive in the Tatas. My question is, you see, I mean, your data points kind of substantiate my belief that, pardon me for being very harsh, that the Muslims as a community, I mean, are kind of becoming an underclass in terms of no political dispensation has addressed their genuine issues for the last decades. That is one. Now, although the backgrounds are different, but this question is for Christophe. There is a similar, if not the same phenomenon happening in France also, where immigrants are, and there's an element of racialism also, and pardon me for saying so, in France as well, where immigrants from the Maghreb constitute some kind of an underclass. So, given, I mean, it's not similar, but what kind of policy measures should the Indian administration or the Indian polity take from, say, the French experience, if there is any, and what do you recommend? Because no nation, no democratic nation can progress if a significant section of the population is backward. That's my question.
Well, even the Sikh community, which is a minority, they're 3% of the population, but 30% of them are in the defense forces. Muslims, again, 3%, but not even 0.5% in the defense forces.
True.
Now, what do you think the reason is?
The representation of Muslims in the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha is consistently higher over the years than in the so-called civil services. And so it looks like there are two spheres, the political sphere and the, I don't know what to call it, some kind of a civil services sphere, and where some sort of conventionally some people would argue meritocracy rules, right? And here the representation is very, very low. In fact, it's 0.1% and 2% and 3%, and then we come to the political sphere, and still it's better than the other one, right? So can you just talk about it more?
The gentleman asked a question: what is the situation in European countries, America, especially when Islamophobia is going on, UK, France? I would also like, I know that you're aware of it, but still I'm just pointing it out, and that is, can Muslim community be taken as a homogeneous unit? Like in my researches, I've found tremendous racial, cultural, class gaps between the leaders of Muslims and the people, and I found that these leaders are nowhere promoting cause of the community. At least this is a few researches that I have done is showing. What I want to know is that who are these Muslims? Are they really, they are very few in number, that I am accepting. But even those who are few in number, are they representing the cause of the community at all? Are they, or, like we know what kind of Muslims are serving BJP and Congress?
Well, first of all, at least two of your questions pertain to what is the situation in Europe, and it's indeed not much better. We do see, we are facing across the globe a wave of Islamophobia that is really taking over Europe as well, where we have a new identity crisis, and the next European elections, by the way, will probably make the EU shift from a universalistic definition to an ethnic one, you can say, with Viktor Orban or Kaczynski. All these people, they don't want to leave the EU. They want to change the identity of the EU, saying this is the Christian bloc, and migrants are, of course, the first one to be contained and even maybe eliminated, at least deported or repatriated. So yes, there is absolutely no doubt that the problem is not circumscribed to India. It is there too. Of course, it's different in India because it has nothing to do with migration. Here, it's about citizens, and it's of course even more problematic when citizens who are in the same country for generations are disenfranchised or at least underrepresented. So the problem is the same, the degree of the problem is somewhat different. Now, what kind of solutions? Because indeed you can't develop a country by ignoring 15% of society, and when I say 15, you can add Dalits, you can add devices. How can you deal with a country by not taking care for almost 1/4 of society? It's completely self-defeating. So one of the solutions that has somewhat worked for Dalits is reservations. There is no doubt that with reservations you make some difference. In fact, we have published an article in Indian Express with my co-author Kalai Saran on what is the average revenue of Muslims in the states where you have reservations for Muslims. Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka. And it's very interesting because it's not because these states are richer that Muslims are richer, they are richer than the others in the same state. So reservations make some difference. And we saw it on the Dalit side. We have something like a Dalit bourgeoisie in some states, including Maharashtra today. Why? Not because of the market, I don't buy this idea that they are benefiting as entrepreneurs. No, they are benefiting as quota beneficiaries. So for me, and in fact, in Europe, in my university, we had these affirmative action programs for the suburbs. In France, you can't deal with religion. This is laicite. So we don't know the religion of the people. But you can use a proxy. If you say, I do something special for the suburbs, you know you do something special for the Muslims. So we had a special program for having the people of the suburbs joining this university, a parallel entry exam. And they benefited a lot. And now you see them on TV, you see them in some places. It does work. It's not a mass program. You know, affirmative action is not giving you, it's not a redistribution program. Affirmative action gives you leaders, elite people. And it's very important because the problem with Muslims in India today is where are the elite people? Where are the leaders? Where are those who can speak for the community? No, the same way Ambedkar made such a huge difference as a lonely man for the Dalits, there is a need for some leadership also. So, I repeat, for these reasons, discrimination, positive discrimination for me is one of the solutions. In the army, I think you know the response. Why so few Muslims? In fact, we got the figures because there was a very good book recently by Stephen Wilkinson, The Sociology of the Army of India. Very, very good book. And it shows that there is only 1% of Muslims in the army. You know, there was, in this book, Stephen cites him, a real concern expressed by Nehru in the 50s saying, what the hell are we doing? We are removing Muslims from the army. I don't want that. But he could not make any difference. And in 1985, George Fernandez, who was to become defense minister, said blatantly, George Fernandez, a socialist leader who had suffered from emergency, blah, 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 said, we don't want Muslims in the army because they are seen as anti-national law. He may say anti-patriotic at that time, but this is the same idea. And there is a survey published by DLK at the same time showing it, and you see communalism coming in the army as well. The saffronization of the army forces, of the forces, is as old as the 90s. It's a huge problem because it's not only the police, but it's also all of them, BSF, CRPC, CRPF, where Muslims are completely marginal. Yes, there are two spheres, and that's why I have two parts in my presentation, because you have the sphere that you join with some exam, and there is politics where you don't need any exam. And I think it's one of the reasons. The main reason, you see, there is a correlation between the underrepresentation of Muslims in the IAS, IPS, judiciary, and education. That's one explanation. Another one is self-censorship. Amitabh Kundu has a very interesting article because he did a kind of review of the Sanchar Committee report. And he said, well, one of the reasons why there are so few Muslims in the IAS and IPS is that they don't apply. They don't compete.
That is the reason, I feel so.
That's another reason. But it is correct to verse 1. Education is required for competing. If you don't get the right education, you don't compete. And you don't compete also because you're not sure this is a fair competition. So you abstain because you're not sure you will be treated fairly. So all these are explanations for underrepresentation of Muslims in this. This idea that they have a bloc, that they are the real majority of India, blah, 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 the kind of rhetoric here. It's completely exposed when you look at the sociology of Muslim community. Caste, class, sectarian movements. I was in Lucknow, and I'm going there again in January. The Shia-Sunni division is amazing. But you have also the Ashraf and the Ashraf. play alike, and also the Azals, even lower. So those who are sitting in the assemblies are usually from the Ashraf group, urban, upper caste, middle class Muslims, largely cut off from their people, and it's an additional, I would say,
suggesting reservation is a problematic issue which, of course, we will have to discuss very seriously, because the sort of hostility against a community which is already so hated and disliked and demonized may just get even worse. But I don't want to go into that. What I do want to suggest is that I think it's also important, while you give us these facts, which we all knew somehow were there, but still come as a shocker, and we have respect for facts. We are not post-truth yet. So we still respect truth and facts. However, what I would like to suggest is, I think as everywhere else in the world today, it is the democracy, functioning democracies which are deeply flawed. And the Muslim issue is part of that. Just as 8% of this country, scheduled tribes, we don't even know about what's going on there. Lakhs can't be accounted for. Similarly, some 16-17% of the Dalits. So what I do want to suggest is that I think Islamophobia is there. There is a special aspect attached to the feeling towards a particular community. But I think in the long run, the issue of communalism can be dealt with better if unities are sought to be gained or established or emphasized, because it's not just a problem of communities, it's a problem of several other sections, several other communities. So I, for example, now believe these wider unities which challenge the functioning of democracy in every country.
Representation, and I think that in the because there is also an increasing conservatism amongst the Muslim community and Muslim men. So when one is speaking about representation, who is this community within the Muslim community too? Because when the debate around triple talaq was on, there was a very clear divide between what the Muslim women's movement was asking for and what the very vocal Muslim men were asking for. So in that context, how does this representation, if one is not simultaneously asking for women to be equally represented?
So my question is to the teacher, the professor from literary and the person. So since you have been in Maharashtra for so long, I come from Delhi. When I came here, I realized that there is a blatant display of populism in Maharashtra in the streets. Like you see Shiv Sena flags put here and there, and you see posters on the walls, and then there comes the changing of names which goes on. So why is it that such blatant display of majoritarianism is not dealt with properly? Why does this blatant saffronization of the streets not opposed by the government? And this affects the society very negatively, because the minorities naturally feel intimidated because of the consequences of such saffronization. So, what would be your comment on this point?
Yeah. I'm Christophe and I'm pursuing PhD from this. So I'm working on caste within Muslims. So I have two questions. First, I will ask something regarding difference. I read one interesting book, The Muslim Elite by Ali Ashraf in Bihar. So he had collected 300 data from the elite Muslims like politician, civil servant and all this. So his finding was that 2/3 two-third majority, two-third percentage of populations are from three like Ashraf category, which you call like Sayyid, Sheikh, Pathan, and in Bihar Malik is another caste. So they share, so two-third population share by within like Bihar, 85% population belong to Pasmanda community. So within Pasmanda, according to Papia Ghosh, 45% population alone share by Ansari community in Bihar. So their representation within elite Muslim is only 7%. Rhine, which share 25% population of total Muslim, they are represented. So they are underrepresented. Aslaf, because 1935 they were under depressed class, like what we call scheduled caste. But when the constitution came 1955, the presidential order has not included Dalit Muslim and Dalit Christian. In the later Sikh in 1956 and Buddhist in 1990 were included in SC list. So these are all like positive discrimination, which ma'am said that no, this not make impact. But I think if they were included in SC category, that will make impact. Now currently I am working on communal politics.
Can we keep it
Okay, but just one question. Currently I am working on communal politics. So my understanding is that, like I read Rekha Thakur article. She said dual agenda, Muslim mass care and criminalization of Bahujan. My understanding is that it's like creation of communal politics and attempt to create communal Hindu identity. Because Dalit and Hindu, they are trying to, through communal identity, they are trying to make them Hindu, politically Hindu community.
Alright, okay, thanks.
I think here one question.
My name is Avinash Appinkar. I have a simple question for Irfan Bhai as well as Shama Dalwaidu. You have gone through, you are very senior, so you must have gone through horrible emergency days. I just want to know whether this current situation you really feel that undeclared emergency exists in country, means situation in country is so bad, do you feel that?
My name is Najwa, I'm a student of TES. So what I wanted to ask is, see, following every riot, the kind of spatial segregation that happens, the kind of ghettoization that happens, is, and there are a lot of negative repercussions because of that. But one of the consequences of that, as it's an observation that has happened, like if you're taking the case of Bombay, is that the representation of Muslims, at least in the local elections, they have been able to maintain that. Like for example, if you take the elections, like say in from 2013, if it was 23 Muslim corporators, it was 32 in the 2017 elections. So this is not an argument for this kind of ghettoization, but what are your comments on that?
The data suggests that Congress in fact hasn't done outstanding job for Muslims as well. And in just this week we have the Congress coming back in 3 states. I just wanted to ask you for, I mean, should we actually be celebrating that we've chosen the lesser evil to come back into the 3 states again? And for how long is this going to continue? And where is the third front?
Professor Jaffrelot can answer this. What has been the role of the left in the political sphere when it comes to Muslims? And if the other panelists can answer, what is the role of the left in the social movements for Muslims?
I am Sangarsh from TSSS. So my question to Professor Christophe Jefferlot. See, in Indian polity, if we see the whole accommodative politics, especially in the context of Bihar, like the leaders like Nitish Kumar, and who he claimed himself as a secular person, and on the other side he also aligns with some kind of communal forces, similar with this BJD, Biju Janata Dal, and as well as in Jammu and Kashmir, this PDP and BJP alliance. So how do you see this contradiction in the Indian democratic politics? And secondly, the contradiction between the defense of democratic values and the defense of their personal political ideologies. So how do you see this kind of things in Indian politics? Thank you.
Since we all acknowledge that Muslims do not constitute a homogeneous community, I think a little more disaggregated data would be extremely useful for us, who are grappling with this whole construction of Muslims as a homogeneous and in stereotype identities. So, along caste, communities, gender particularly, even even if it's very minuscule in the services and so on, it's really very, it would be very useful. My question is, particularly in the assembly elections, if they have performed slightly better than in the Lok Sabha, then, and particularly they have acted as vote banks, in the sense the winning parties have won because of vote from the Muslim community. Why is it that election after election they have not been able to push for Muslim candidates in those places where they could be a decisive, vote? Because if I sort of, from my impression in Kerala is that, they have demanded a Muslim candidate and ensured that. So why is it that in all the other areas, particularly in assembly elections, they have not been able to pressurize the political party to have a Muslim candidate?
In West Bengal, left rule was there for a very long time. And I think before such a report, for a long time, CPM ruled. So one of the things which was found in such a report is that many seats were actually in the areas where Muslims were in majority or are in majority were reserved for the SCs. It's a very clear tactic of keeping Muslims away from the assemblies or whatever. So this is one thing which we must also, these are the tactics made by people in the administration, not necessarily the political people. Maybe political, but even in Maharashtra you find that administrative is very, very communal. Police is very, very communal, which we have experienced. So it is not necessary that only political leadership has done it, okay? Which was CPM, as I mentioned to you. So this is how representation becomes a problem many times, because if it is SC and it is majority Muslim, then they cannot get representation. In other areas, where they are in small number or percentage is small, there of course they won't get tickets. So this is one problem. I'm not going into the details of anything, but second thing is about education. I also feel that I have doubts about reservation for that, because that is for this reason that, I'm not going into the reasons also, but one of the very important things which can be done for Muslim education is that in every district, or to that extent in every taluka, if the hostels are given to Muslims with all kind of, as there are hostels for SCs and STs, there can be hostels for Muslims, because that is one of the reasons why Muslim education is lagging behind. So whatever we have discussed about Sachar committee, its recommendations, etc., one of the things is, to give them all kind of facilities as they are given to Dalits, so that they can get education, may not go to that IAS and IPS, I don't know, but at least a good kind of competitive capabilities they can develop with this kind of education. And one thing I would like to mention, because this one had raised, the issue of Muslims, I feel the whole middle class of Muslims went to Pakistan in 1947 itself. Then what remained in the country is the very elite, which is a very short percentage, and large number, which is at the lowest level. And what you consider as sheikh and this and that, they are also, because amongst the Muslim OBCs, no farmer's caste is taken up. They are only the artisan caste. And therefore the farmer's caste amongst the Muslims, sheikh belong to that. We don't even know whether they are OBCs or not, what kind of, backwardness is there amongst Sheikh. So I have a feeling that this Muslim OBC is a very, very, problematic category. The number is actually, number of backward class Muslims is much more than what is shown in the list of Muslim OBCs. And the middle class is not there. Therefore also representation everywhere is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to be quick because we are all tired after this somewhat grim situation also. But still, we have to continue the battle. Well, indeed, one way out is to go for class politics and consider that irrespective of communities, caste or whatever, the Dalits indeed, Adivasis indeed, and Ashraf and Azad should join hands. In a way, this is what has happened in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, with rural versus urban division became prevailing. If you replace communalism by this kind of cleavage, then of course you can remove the stigma and don't look at people according to their community, but according to their socio-economic status. That's one of the way out. And definitely this is the trend if we go by what has happened in these three states. Yes, conservatism indeed, we can't go into these subcategories, but certainly among Sunnis we see new trends. Well, sometimes it's not that new because the Shabano case is not that new, for instance. It was there in '85, but it has increased somewhat, and it's not helping at all. This reformist, quote-unquote reformist way of being Muslim goes against the what I call the Dargah culture. It goes against what is the true identity of Islam in South Asia. I'm working on Pakistan a lot. I'm going to Lahore next month, and the kind of transformation of Islam that has taken place there is just amazing. And the way the Sufi traditions are back to the wall, on the defensive, constantly under attack, not only verbally but physically, shows that we have entered a new phase. It's not the conservatism of yesterday, it's not only social conservatism, it's a new ideology, it's a new identity. So this is something, of course, to take care of, because that would make the situation even much worse for the minorities. Women, yes, of course, they are even less. In fact, we have just finished with, again, the Ashoka people, a survey of all the Vidhan Sabhas. There are only 6% of women in India's Vidhan Sabha. So, yes, the underrepresentation is much more because, well, women are not 50% in India, as you know. They should be 50%. They are a bit less than that. 40 million girls are missing. But at least they are 40 plus, and they are only 6% of the MPs, and 10% of the MPs in Lok Sabha. I can't deal with everything. Well, 2 points, or 3. Yes, of course, in some wards, you have Muslim candidates and corporators, because these are Muslim-dominated wards, because of ghettoization, as you said. The problem is that municipal corporations have so little power. What kind of corporator do? What kind of Muslim corporator do? So it's not certainly a good thing, but it's not a good thing in itself, but it's also a bad thing because, well, you vote for a Muslim operator who will not be able to help at all. Yes, many more Muslims in jail than they should. In fact, the Crime Bureau has given a very interesting statistic. They will not give it anymore, but in 2016, in 2016, that was the last time we learned that, you had 21% of the jail inmates who were Muslims. You have 14% of Muslims in society. You have 21% of those who are in jail who are Muslims. When you look at those who are convicted, the rate falls to 15%. This gap between 15 and 21% reflects police prejudice. The police has to do something. What is the easiest thing to do when you have any attack anywhere? To go to the Muslim ghetto and take some young boys and put them behind the bars, and then they'll be there for years, sometimes decades. And this is why I give these figures also, because if you add more Muslim IPS officers, you would probably add less situations of that kind. But what is also interesting is that in spite of the fact that you have very few Muslims in the judiciary gives their, well, at least some justice, does some justice to the minorities, which is very interesting. This is the institution where you have still the sense of human rights, equality of citizens, and hopefully that will remain. But it's an interesting counter example of you don't need to be represented for being defended. The last point, I can bracket together at least 3 questions regarding Congress, the left, and Nitish Kumar and Navin and Pashwan. The list is long of those who claim to be secular and who are not. Because of polarization, because of this idea that, well, you may not win that seat if you field a Muslim candidate. You have this, and Congress is going in that direction. Considering that, what's the point? You give tickets to Muslims in places they can't win. Because you have to give a certain percent of Muslim candidates. But you don't want to waste a seat by fielding a Muslim. So they claim to be secular. And of course Nitish is a perfect example of this. But the truth is that they are playing in the hands of, how far is the evil lesser? I still think it is much better than the present evil. That there is not a difference of degree but a difference of nature, which is a very important point to make. But they have to be reminded constantly that this is where the red line is. And it will work at the top as usual. Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi. At the top there was hardly any real problem. But when you looked at the party bosses at the state level, the Govind Vallabh Pant, the Ravi Shankar Shukla, so many chief ministers would never even recognize Urdu as the official language. Do you know that Urdu was recognized as the official language of Uttar Pradesh in 1989? And not by Congress, well, by the PC. So we have this problem in the Congress where you have 2 kinds of people. Again, at the top, yes, they are true to the initial ideology, but they easily dilute it at the state level when, of course, power is the main driving force and principles can wait. So, yeah, watch them and remind them that they have to be true to the DNA of the party, because if they do not remain true to this Nehruvian and Gandhian tradition, they're bound to fail, and that's what has happened. So if they want to recover for good, they have to recognize unity in diversity fully.